Welcome to the official podcast series by POTENZA, where innovation meets insight. In this series, we dive deep into the world of SAP, explore the power of robotic process automation, and unlock the true potential of data analytics. Whether you're a tech enthusiast, a business leader, or just curious about the digital transformation shaping our world, you're in the right place. Tune in, stay curious, and let's explore the future of enterprise technology together. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube for more powerful insights. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a subject that's really gaining traction, especially looking ahead past 2025. Ownership data. We've got a set of sources here, mostly articles, some research focusing on strategy, compliance, that kind of thing.
That's right. And it's a term, ownership data. That sounds simple, but as these sources really highlight, it's got layers. It's much more than just, holding on to some data.
Exactly. We all know data is vital, drives business, decisions, everything.
Yeah.
But with regulations tightening and data getting more complex, actually owning it, knowing who has the rights, who's accountable, well, that's shifting from just good housekeeping to, frankly, core strategy.
Yeah, it's about managing it like a really valuable asset, which of course it is, not just possessing it.
So our mission today, let's unpack what these sources tell us. What is ownership data, really? Why is it suddenly such a big deal moving up the agenda? And, how are companies actually dealing with it day to day?
Trying to bring some clarity and, importantly, control to what's probably your most widespread asset.
Okay, let's dive right in. Even for people deep in data, this idea of ownership, it can be tricky. So fundamentally, what are the sources saying data ownership is?
Well, at its heart, it's about the defined legal rights and, crucially, the responsibilities that are tied to a specific chunk of data or a property record. It's less about who can access it technically and more about who has the formal, recognized authority to control it, change it, transfer it.
And who carries the can if something goes wrong?
Exactly. Accountability is key. Who's responsible for its proper use? Or misuse, unfortunately.
So it's not just having the keys, it's actually holding the deed as well.
That's a great way to put it. One source uses a real estate analogy that works quite well. Just like title deeds prove you own a house, ownership data acts as that formal proof for digital or physical asset claims. It's the documentation, the registration.
Okay, that helps, makes it tangible. So what kind of specific information are we talking about here? What falls under this umbrella?
The sources give a few examples. Things like property title details, obviously. Corporate shareholding structures, who owns the company, deeds and transaction histories, information registered in government databases. And it stretches into the digital realm, too, claims on intellectual property, NFTs, things like that.
Anything that formally validates a claim, basically.
Yeah.
Physical or digital.
Pretty much. If it proves a right or establishes who holds the title, it's likely ownership data.
Now, you mentioned this is becoming a board-level concern. Why the big push now? Why does it matter so much all of a sudden?
Well, the sources argue pretty strongly that it's moved beyond just, ticking a compliance box. Managing ownership data strategically is actually becoming a way to build trust, manage risk more effectively, and even unlock value. We see this across industries: real estate, finance, healthcare, tech.
Okay, but how does knowing who formally owns, say, a customer data set translate into building trust or managing risk?
It's because global regulations are getting much stricter. Think GDPR, HIPAA, CCPA on the privacy side, but also things like anti-money laundering, AML regulations. Having crystal clear ownership data becomes absolutely central to proving compliance.
Oh.
It underpins transparency. It makes compliance checks meaningful. It secures property rights and asset history lineage, you might call it. It's vital for M&A due diligence. And fundamentally, you can't really uphold data privacy or consent if you can't demonstrate who owns the data and what rights come with it. How do you prove consent if ownership is fuzzy?
Right, that makes perfect sense. It's the foundation for proving anything else about the data.
Right.
Okay, let's dig a bit deeper into that definition again. You talked about formal rights, accountability, and stewardship. Where does stewardship fit in? That sounds active.
It is. Stewardship is the active management part of ownership. The owner isn't just a name on a list. They're responsible for making sure the documentation is right, the security is in place, the governance around it is actually working. It's about maintaining the integrity and trustworthiness of that ownership claim over time.
So the owner is the guardian too. Got it. The sources also break down different types of ownership. Can you walk us through those? Because it's not always simple, is it?
No, definitely not. The type depends on what the data is and who holds it. The main ones mentioned are Individual ownership, that's your personal data, identity, health records, where you, the individual, typically hold the primary rights.
Okay, personal data. Makes sense.
Then corporate ownership. This covers business records, customer lists, employee data, IP the company creates or holds. Pretty standard.
Right. But these days, data isn't always neatly in one box, is it?
Exactly. Which leads to joint ownership. This is where multiple parties might share rights and responsibilities over the same data, usually laid out in specific agreements. Think partnerships, collaborations.
Okay.
And then there's third-party custodianship, which is huge now. This is where one entity legally owns the data, but another company manages or stores it, like using a cloud provider or a SaaS tool. The data is still mine, legally, but it lives in your system.
That's a really important distinction, especially with cloud everywhere. So each type needs a different approach.
Absolutely. The sources are clear on this. Each needs tailored rights defined, specific protections, and crucially, clear ways to prove who's authorized to do what. It gets particularly complex in sectors like finance or real estate, where assets and their data change hands frequently.
And the legal implications of all this must be pretty significant.
Oh, completely. It's woven through the whole thing. It touches everything from IP rights to regulatory fines. A business might own the data it creates. Yes, that's its intellectual property, but it still has to comply with privacy laws like GDPR or HIPAA about how it handles data about individuals.
So owning the IP doesn't give you a free pass on privacy.
Not at all. They run in parallel. You need that formal proof of ownership contracts, licenses, deeds to back up your claim. And with ownership comes liability. If there's a breach or misuse, or you fail to keep records straight or meet registration requirements, the owner is generally the one held responsible.
That's a hefty weight. Okay, so we've got the what and the why, strategically, legally. But let's get practical. Who does this work inside a company? What are the key roles involved?
Yeah, it's definitely not a one-person job. The sources describe it as more of a network of responsibilities. You usually have a designated data owner for specific data sets. That's the person with the ultimate authority and accountability, the one who can assign rights and manage access.
Okay, the buck stops with them for that data. Who else?
Then there's often a data steward. Their focus is more on the quality, the standards, making sure the data is consistent and fit for purpose. They're guardians of integrity, you could say.
Right.
You also need the IT custodians. They look after the technical side, the databases, the storage, the infrastructure where all this ownership information lives.
The tech folks.
And critically important, the legal teams. They're involved in reviewing contracts, setting boundaries for use, making sure registrations and transfers follow all the rules and regulations.
So it's a team effort.
Yeah.
Business accountability, data expertise, tech support, and legal guidance.
Precisely. Getting these roles working together smoothly is essential. It's how you make sure the ownership records are accurate, traceable, secure, and actually support what the business is trying to achieve, whether that's managing property or digital assets.
Okay, understanding it is one thing, but putting it into practice sounds like where the real challenge lies. How do organizations actually manage this well? What are the best practices?
Well, it starts with treating ownership data like the high-value asset it is, just like financial records or property deeds. The sources highlight a few key practices. First, establish those roles really clearly. Who owns what, who maintains it, who governs it, no ambiguity.
Clarity first. Makes sense.
Second, documentation is everything. Every change, title transfers, shifts in control, permissions granted needs to be meticulously logged with proof and kept somewhere secure but accessible.
A solid audit trail.
Exactly. Third, try to centralize these records. Use integrated platforms or data governance tools if you can. Avoid having bits of ownership proof scattered across emails and spreadsheets.
Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It can be. Fourth, embed legal oversight. Get legal involved early to validate registrations, check contracts, make sure compliance is built in, not bolted on. And fifth, regular checks, audits, access reviews to make sure everything is still accurate, consistent, and compliant.
And this all needs to be underpinned by clear policies, right? What goes into a good ownership policy?
Absolutely. Policy is the rule book. A solid one should spell out the ownership declaration, who owns this specific data, what are their responsibilities. It needs to detail the rights and restrictions, what can and can't be done with it. Clear protocols for access and transfer. How do you change title, record a deed, shift control?
And the legal bits.
Non-negotiable. Legal and compliance clauses are essential, referencing the specific regulations that apply and outlining how disputes get resolved. And finally, detailed documentation requirements, what format, how long to keep it, how to validate it.
That sounds comprehensive and also like quite a bit of work to set up and maintain. What are the common hurdles organizations hit when they try to do this?
It's definitely challenging. Common problems include those data silos we mentioned, ownership info fragmented everywhere. Lack of clarity in roles is a big one, especially in complex organizations, leading to gaps or overlaps. Poor historical documentation, sometimes the lineage is just lost.
Right.
Keeping up with changing regulations is a constant battle, and system integration issues, different platforms not talking to each other properly, leading to inconsistencies in ownership data.
And I think the sources mentioned a warning about when these problems often come to light.
Yes, a really important point. They often surface during high-pressure situations like M&A due diligence or a major compliance audit. And trying to fix fundamental ownership record issues at that point is, well, much harder, more expensive, and way more disruptive than managing it proactively.
You don't want to be scrambling then. It really
Yeah.
drives home why it needs forethought. Okay, so how does this idea of data ownership fit with the broader concepts of data management and data governance? Are they interchangeable?
Good question. They're definitely related, but distinct. Think of it like this. Ownership is the who. It identifies the authority, the responsibility, the accountability. It's the formal claim.
Okay, they do.
Data management is the how. It's the practical stuff, organizing, storing, securing, maintaining those ownership records, and the data itself.
So management is the work that supports the ownership claim.
Exactly. You need strong data management practices to ensure your ownership documentation is accurate, secure, and usable. Without good management, you could lose track of your assets or make bad decisions based on out-of-date ownership info. There's a good tip in the sources. Treat every data asset like property, give it an owner, a management plan, and a review schedule.
That's a clear way to think about it. So where does data governance fit in?
Governance provides the framework, the rules of the road. It formalizes those ownership structures and sets up the processes for tracking, controlling, and optimizing the whole life cycle of ownership data. Think registration protocols, transfer controls, audit trails, standardization rules. That's all governance.
So ownership defines who's in charge, management does the day-to-day work, and governance sets the rules and structure for both.
You've got it. Without that governance layer providing structure, ownership can become ambiguous. And that's when things break down: compliance gaps, security risks, inability to manage assets effectively.
Let's bring this down to specific use cases. What about using data for analytics or sharing it externally? How does ownership impact that?
It's absolutely fundamental there. For data analytics, especially complex stuff like AI models, knowing who owns the source data is crucial for trusting the results. You need to validate the quality, the accuracy. If ownership is unclear, how can you verify the data's integrity?
Right. Garbage in, garbage out, amplified.
Exactly. And it's also about compliance, making sure you have the rights to use that data for analysis, preventing misuse of sensitive info. So in practice, it means tagging data with its origin, assigning stewards for quality checks, and enforcing access based on rights.
And what about data sharing? Collaboration often requires sharing data, but you need to protect it too.
Yeah, sharing data safely and effectively hinges on clear ownership and governance. Without it, you risk giving away proprietary info, breaching contracts, or breaking regulations. Sharing confidently means embedding usage terms, defining rights clearly in agreements, maybe using platforms with dynamic access controls, and always tracking who accessed what.
It always comes back to knowing who has the right and what they're allowed to do.
That's the foundation for any trustworthy data exchange.
Okay, digging a bit deeper, the sources also talk about something called beneficial ownership. That sounds like another layer of complexity. What's that about?
It definitely adds a layer. Beneficial ownership essentially peels back the formal legal ownership structure to find the actual natural person or persons who ultimately own or control an asset. Even if the title is held by a company, a trust, whatever, it's about who really enjoys the benefits, the profits, the control.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think of a major shareholder in a company whose name isn't obvious from the public filings, but who pulls the strings. Or the beneficiary of a trust who effectively controls property held by a trustee. Or maybe an investor using complex layers of shell companies across borders to control assets.
Right, layers designed to obscure sometimes.
Yeah.
Why is digging down to this beneficial level so important?
It's absolutely critical in fighting major financial crime, money laundering, terrorist financing, fraud, tax evasion, corruption. Identifying the real people behind complex structures is key.
So it's mainly for law enforcement and regulators.
That's a huge driver, yes.
Yeah.
Governments and financial institutions increasingly demand this info, but it's also vital for businesses themselves. Knowing the true beneficial owner gives you assurance when onboarding clients, clarity during due diligence, transparency for investments, and confidence when transferring assets. You know who you're really dealing with.
Given how complex those structures can be, tracking this must be difficult.
It's a massive challenge, mainly because historically there's been so much inconsistency in how this information is recorded and shared across different countries and systems. It makes global tracking and verification incredibly hard.
Is there a solution emerging?
Standardization is seen as key. That's where initiatives like the Beneficial Ownership Data Standard, or BODS, come into play.
BODS, what does that do?
BODS aims to create a common format, a consistent way to structure and share beneficial ownership data. Using standard fields and identifiers makes it easier to link data from different sources, public registries, private compliance systems. It allows for quicker validation and supports things like API integrations, making the data more usable and accessible for analysis and checks.
So trying to connect the dots in a fragmented landscape. Okay, let's pull this all together. For you listening, what's the bottom line here? What does this deep dive into ownership data really mean?
Well, I think what the sources consistently emphasize is that thinking about data ownership as more than just admin is, well, it's becoming essential. Getting it right helps you navigate complex regulations, stay agile, be ready for investors with clean records, protect your actual assets, build trust internally and externally, and ultimately it strengthens your position in the market.
Yeah, it seems to answer those fundamental questions. What is this stuff we own? Why does knowing who owns it matter so much for decisions? What are the real pitfalls? How do we enforce it? What's the role of governments and standards? How does it help transparency? And, what does a good strategy even look like?
Exactly. It provides a path from potentially data chaos to having confident control over these really critical assets.
This has been fascinating. It's really clear that ownership, both the straightforward legal kind and that complex beneficial layer, is just going to become more and more critical as everything gets more digital, more interconnected, and more regulated. Nailing down who owns what and proving it seems absolutely vital.
The complexity isn't going away, that's for sure. The layers just keep building.
Which kind of leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over after this deep dive. Considering just how complex these data structures and beneficial ownership chains can get, how much transparency do you think is actually possible to achieve in practice? And what level of ownership clarity do we ultimately need to establish and maintain trust in our increasingly digital world?
That really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? A tough question.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into ownership data.
Thank you.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a new stack of sources.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the POTENZA podcast series, where we decode SAP, automate with RPA, and analyze with precision. We hope you found today's conversation insightful and inspiring. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the technologies transforming tomorrow's enterprise. Got questions or ideas for a future episode? Drop them in the comments, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time. Thank you.